This is Pink Talks, the place where we discuss intersectionality and human rights.
Welcome to Pink Talks, where we discuss human rights and all things intersectional. I'm Alexandra Marquito, the host of today's episode, where we'll be discussing the rise of online misogyny with Karen Whybro. As women, we live in the midst of a society that regards us as contemptible. We are despised. We are the victims of continuous, malevolent, and sanctioned violence against us. Those were the words of Andrea Dworkin, American feminist and activist in the 70s, words which are still relevant today. The internet and digital media generally offer immense potential as spaces for engagement, activism, and debates. However, we're witnessing now more than ever that this all-inclusive participatory space that is genuinely open is filled with hateful misogynistic content, impacting greatly women as well as men and children, with the people behind the most toxic online behavior typically avoiding any major real-world consequences. Now, contrary to what most people may think, misogynistic influencers are not a few weird people on the internet, but there are online communities of men actively advocating the performance of sexual abuse against women. This is particularly worrying, as such communities and influencers very deliberately provide young men with real misconceptions about feminism and women. Many ideologies we see perceive women's advances made in recent decades in terms of participation in public life, leadership, and economy as a threat. Online misogyny is greatly exercised towards marginalized groups such as feminists, Black women, politicians, journalists, people who belong in the LGBTQI community, many of whom end up feeling afraid to express their opinion or even end up deleting their accounts. We're really pleased on this episode to interview Karen Whybro, women's safety consultant who advises local authorities, businesses, and organizations on improving women's safety and the end of violence against women and girls through creating culture-centered safe spaces. Karen is also working with Essex Police on reducing sexism and misogyny as part of their professionalism training. She's also a Ph.D. student at Portsmouth University, researching the role of the nighttime economy in reducing violence against women and girls. Karen recently held a webinar workshop for parents and educators to help understand the threat of online misogyny, which we'll be discussing in this episode moving forward. Now, before we get started, we are going to add a content warning to let you know that this episode gets into sensitive conversations, may be disturbing and not suitable for our listeners. So if you find this is too heavy, just tune out. It's okay. So with that heavy introduction, hi Karen, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Perhaps our listeners, before we dive right in our topic, would like to know where your passion for feminism and women's safety stems from.
Absolutely. I think I'm someone who's always considered myself to be a feminist. So I've always had just an innate feeling that, you know, it's a huge injustice that women sit in a particular status in society. But really my work kind of started properly after Sarah Everard's murder. And here in the UK, we were still locked down at that point. We were only allowed to gather in small groups outside. So I tried to host a vigil for Sarah, and that was shut down by our Home Office, and the police put a complete stop on us being able to host that vigil. And I was actually threatened with a £10,000 fine if I did go ahead with that event. So for me, it was the first time that I really felt like there was systemic silencing of women, and the real kind of authority figure using its power to silence our right to protest and our right to say that here we are in, you know, what was 2021 at the time, still unable to discuss male violence. So that's kind of where I started, and then I worked with my local council to create a safety charter in my local city, which was launched last year. So we've now signed up over 30 businesses in our city centre, and I've trained 20 of them already in how to create positive cultural spaces for women. So it's less on the hardware of safety. My work is definitely culture focused, talking about how we can increase awareness and understanding of violence against women and girls, a real focus on rape culture and how that affects the real lived experiences of women in their everyday lives, and try to educate everybody to understand that this tolerance of misogyny and sexism that women have and we tolerate in society, does escalate to these more serious crimes and unfortunately the high profile cases that we've seen in recent years.
Mm-hmm. Little disclaimer, Karen and I know each other. I texted her last year through a DM on Instagram because I found your work very brave and honest, and we discussed a lot of things that affect women around the world. So we're going to move on with the term misogyny. We researched a bit upon the term, and as we wish to explore where it came from, and we found very interesting data, which we're going to share with you to initiate our discussion for today's episode. Misogyny comes from the Greek word misogynia, which means woman hating. And although it was not conceptualized as such, can be traced back to ancient Greeks and Romans who spent a lot of time thinking about gender roles and worrying about what would happen if women were to gain power. During our research, we discovered that Aristotle labeled women, and we quote him, as the inferior sex, and determined that women being endowed with weakness and imperfection were not capable of abstract reasoning and were bound to the domestic sphere. Actually, various scholars gave him the title of the most acclaimed misogynist. What was interesting to find was that in medieval Europe, the pioneer who systematically questioned and tackled cultural misogyny was a writer, Christine de Bizan, who in 1405 challenged misogyny from different points of view. As she said, she was particularly disgusted by the casual hatred and belittling of women that was displayed in so much courtly literature of the day. According to Christine de Bizan, the entire cultural landscape which she came across was a conspiracy to gaslight women and to persuade them that the evidence of their own reason and experience must be flawed because it disagreed with male authorities. Moving from the 14th century to more recent data, it appears that misogyny referring to acts of contempt against women entered the feminism glossary in the second wave feminism with Andrea Dworkin's book called Woman Hating. She argued that a deep ingrained prejudice against women informs aspects of society, from cohabitation to legislation. During the same era, in the 70s, when women's rights movement entered the era, it challenged the patriarchal status quo, and at the same time, misogynist ideologies surfaced, like the men's rights movement, aiming to reinstate men's dominance. Such movements denied the existence of patriarchy and argued that men and not women were victims of sexism and discrimination. Also, the so-called seduction industry developed an enterprise to sell media and seminars promising to men how to seduce or pick up women, leading to these men being called pick-up artists. With that few being said, we're curious to know what misogyny is to you and how do you define it?
So I think to me, it has this, because it has such this huge, lengthy, history to it. Looking at phrases such as hysteria, which has the etymology of being connected to the womb and how it can only relate to women. That women are innately hysterical, that they mustn't be believed, they're not to be trusted, they're manipulative. that feeds all the way through into the modern day misogyny that you see in those exact creators that you've just referenced there, like the pickup artists. But it also really embeds itself in systemic discrimination, such as the fact that here in the UK, for example, we have 1.4% conviction rate for rape, because women are seen as, like I said, hysterical, liars, not to be trusted, exaggerating things, or we manipulate men. So we will, give consent and then just choose to withdraw that after the matter. And that's a huge issue of debate around in the men's rights groups about consent and how it's given too much credence. And actually, if we allow women to have that power during consent, then we're going to see this, huge swathe of false accusations, and they talk a lot about false accusations. So to me, it really illustrates, misogyny really illustrates that really entrenched discrimination towards women, hatred towards women, distrust in women as well. And like you say, the fear that women will take back power, will destroy the traditional family concept, and will really, push men out of the powerful arena that they currently have. I don't think when you look at that kind of full circle of attitudes, it doesn't feel like we've moved very far away from those times of ancient Greece, sadly.
Yes. Various scholars argue that sexism and misogyny are different in the sense that they seem similar, but they play different roles in the systemic oppression of women and in the manner and urgency with which they should be fought. What is your view on that?
Yeah, I think, again, if we're looking at a whole systemic issue, and then if we're looking at individuals, that's probably, for me, the easiest way to define the two. So I would say that somebody could definitely be sexist in that, they might think that women should do all the cooking at home, or it's only women who should do the childcare. And they're feeding from those misogynistic, patriarchal systems and structures that have been embedded in their existence. But they might not necessarily have that misogynistic kind of hatred or discrimination towards women in the sense that they wouldn't think they're only capable of doing that. So I think it's really important to distinguish between the two, because otherwise we quickly become quite entrenched in this attitude that it's men versus women, and we can't meet somewhere and have an agreement on how we move forward. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important more than ever to really understand that people can have sexist views and attitudes, but they can be changed and they can be discussed and debated if people are willing to. Because the men's rights activists, they really will shut down any debate. They don't want to listen. They don't want to engage in that conversation. So it's that, to me, that kind of thinking about it on an individual level is more to me, demonstrates more a sexist attitude. And the misogyny is much more on that systemic patriarchal structures, and also those people who really do display an attitude, to me, that women are incapable. Women don't have the intellect. Women don't have the, the equal ability to do the things that men do. I think that, to me, is probably distinguishes it for me.
Mm-hmm. So, talking about online misogyny today, concerns have been raised by experts about the spread of content featuring a particularly viral man on TikTok who is currently under detention in Romania, facing allegations of human trafficking and being part of an organized crime gang. We will not mention his name, as we do not wish to give him more credit, but we will read through a few of the statements made online just to give our listeners an understanding of the content we're talking about. In an interview, he said with another YouTuber that he was absolutely a misogynist, and added, "I'm a realist, and when you're a realist, you're sexist. It has been proven that the smartest people in the world are men. Women belong in the home, can't drive, and are a man's property." He talked about hitting and choking women by acting out how he would attack a woman if she accused him of cheating. He has no sympathy Yes, he said, for women who go out and drink alcohol and then get sexually assaulted. Take some personal responsibility. Do you think views are news to us?
No, I think he has been given a lot of attention and a lot of focus. And what I continue to say to people is, he is a product of our society. He is not an original mind, in this respect. He's very, very clear and very upfront that women are a commodity and he uses them to make money. And he has never tried to hide that fact that he has those views. If we didn't have a society that normalized and perpetrated a normalization and acceptance of violence and hatred towards women, then he wouldn't be in the position he is in now. So I think we have to be careful that we think that with his detention or with his removal from social media platforms that we're somehow solving the problem, when it's very clear that the legacy that he will leave behind is actually one where it's legitimized his attitudes, because we can see powerful men sharing his content. We can see those who position themselves as quite reasonable people, quite intellectual people, arguing that this is an attack on free speech. Mm-hmm. So I think, I always think that he is a product of our society. He's not a unique, example of free thinking or critical thinking. He's just someone who is, to me, a con man who has used women to make the money that he has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could say that he's another entry in a long line of other men who have done something similar in the past, as we saw with the men's rights movement in the 70s. So if you go on any YouTube video of him and read the comments under the video, they're all almost universally positive, praising him for how inspirational he is, as you said. And there are a few dissenting voices on the YouTube comments. And we're wondering, there are so many other influencers and podcasts, such as the Man Enough podcast, which I've been listening lately. But why do you think a self-proclaimed misogynist appeals to millions of people?
I think this is where we kind of have to recognise the intersection of capitalism and misogyny. And at the end of the day, I would like to believe, and I do believe, that especially young men and young boys are attracted to his rhetoric because they want a step-by-step plan of how they can become rich and powerful. So it's not so much that they want to focus on the attack of women or the violence against women. They legitimately want to know how they can learn from this person to get the position of status and power that he has. And that's what he offered to young men. He offered the opportunity in his academy or his online coaching to for him to teach them how they could do that. Now, unfortunately, the counterculture of the anti-misogyny, like you say, We Are Man Enough, or any of those great content creators, they don't have that hook of, do you know what, we can promise you this amazing life if you follow us. It's relying on, somebody having an interest in social responsibility, having some kind of empathy already, understanding that we all have our own kind of accountability and position in other people's welfare and other people's lives. And I think that's where we're going to hit a wall in some respects, that at the moment when people feel, to me, that they're becoming much more insular, they're becoming much more protective over what they have because of the economic situation in lots of places, how stressed people are feeling, how much people are buying into conspiracy theories off the back of COVID as well. It's going to be a lot harder of a fight to get those counter content, how to get that to have the reach that the much more glamorous and financially focused creators who embed misogyny within them how we fight against that, I think, is a huge question that I'm not sure how we solve right now.
Yeah, we'll discuss a bit on the regulatory changes happening later on in this episode. Gender equality campaigner Gina Martin said that there was a serious problem with misogyny in some schools. She said, and I quote, "I've met teachers who had male students come into classes refusing to learn from women because they don't know anything." You recently held a webinar for parents and educators to help understand the threat of online misogyny. What did you learn from that workshop about the impact of online misogyny in schools and at home?
I think the first thing I learned that was really encouraging for me is that so many people are really concerned and really want to do something about it. I think my worry is that we have such a generational gap between our older people who are in positions of authority, such as teachers, social workers, any professionals that work with young people. Their lives have been so far removed from the lives of young men now and young people in terms of technology, in terms of culturally the content that people consume. Political shift, so much sort of ties into it. And so I was really encouraged that so many people took part in the webinar and really wanted to hear about it. But every single piece of feedback is, I didn't realize it was this bad. So for me, it's continuing to make sure that people understand just how toxic this content is, but also taking that down a notch and looking at some of the creators who have equally huge followings, but really position themselves in a place where they sit within the community guidelines on social media platforms. So they don't get banned, they don't get reported so much, because they really are very good at creating content that really seems quite harmless. It seems very positive. It seems to be, guiding young men in very positive choices, but has a very deep set misogyny, which only comes out now and again, and they kind of feed into their content. And the problem with those creators is that they're usually targeting younger boys as well. So where we might be focusing on the teenagers, we really need to start focusing on the year, in the UK, year 5, which is kind of 9, 10, 11. That's where we need to really look at. They've already been influenced by some of these other creators who pitch themselves at a lower level and subtly feed in rhetoric around traditional roles, traditional households, and really coercive elements of relationship advice as well.
Yeah, I guess the young boys at that age, they absorb social information like a sponge. So if what you're feeding them is this, then that is going to be absorbed without analyzing it, because they're not at an age where they can.
And also they're not having conversations within their families or within any other role model in their lives, because the parents aren't aware of how these content creators are operating.
Yes. So I want to give our listeners some numbers, which can be exhausting, but we think it's very important because behind those numbers there are so many victims who are in pain and fear. Amnesty International UK published its 2017 report stating that online abuse of women is widespread in the UK, with 1 in 5 women having suffered online abuse or harassment. 250 women out of the 500 surveyed said the abuse or harassment they received was sexist or misogynistic, with 135 women saying it threatened sexual or physical assault. According to the same survey, 275 women, more than half of those surveyed, said that they experienced anxiety, stress, or panic attacks as a result of their online abuse. Many faced other psychological consequences, such as loss of self-esteem and a sense of powerlessness in their ability to respond to the abuse. In an Ipsos survey, 9,235 people, almost half of the people surveyed, have been exposed to sexist or misogynistic content online in the past 2 years, and a minority did find online abuse to be acceptable. Interestingly enough, the survey showed that 7,183 people think that it's mainly men's fault, that online abuse is a problem today, and men also agreed with this. According to the European Parliament Research Service Value Assessment, it is estimated that 1 in 10 women have experienced cyber harassment or cyber stalking since the age of 15. More than 1 in 5 people who belong in the LGBTIQ community had experienced cyber harassment in the year 2021, which is higher than the general female population. The same assessment reveals that the overall costs of cyber harassment and cyber stalking perpetrated against women over 18 years of age, including healthcare costs, legal costs, labor market costs, and costs to quality of life, were estimated in the range of 49 to 89.3 billion euros. So we heard these numbers, but we wanted to know what your experience is from the work that you do with women, and yes.
So I have kind of two levels of experience, I guess, to talk about, because I have kind of my general experience as a woman, which has I've always experienced some form of, I'm going to say abuse in quotation marks, because I don't think the people perpetrating it believed it was abuse. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I run a bridal boutique and have done for 9 years, and often it would be me modeling the dresses. So they would go onto Instagram, for example, and I would instantly get, messages that were sexual in nature, or they would be, you need to smile more, you'd look better if you did this, who's the tart in the dress, these kind of just mindless, I think, I'll send a few aubergine emojis, and there's no understanding from those people, first of all, of why that's sexist, and secondly, the impact that it has on someone, or that it would even be offensive. And quite often I would kind of reply and say, what are you doing? And most of the time they'd be like, oh, sorry, I was just saying you look really nice. And, that kind of, the lack of empathy and the lack of understanding of, don't speak to people like that, because you wouldn't speak to me like that if I was stood in front of you, or hopefully not, in real life. And I think there is that kind of everyday, stupid comments that you see all the time on social media. If it's a meme about a woman, you get sort of sexist comments, sexist jokes, banter, that kind of attitude. And then the other end of the scale, so when I joined TikTok last year under an account called Not All Men, because I really wanted to understand the psychology around male defensiveness, talking about male violence or equality, and the level of abuse on there was off the charts. And I would say, and I always say, that as someone, I'm in my 40s, I've got a very thick skin, I'm not offended easily, I'm not scared easily, I live on my own, I'm not someone who is, I don't consider myself a vulnerable person, I wouldn't say that I'm easily frightened. And I got to the point on TikTok where I was frightened for my safety, I was frightened for my daughter's safety. I had death threats, I had people saying, I hope someone sends you a pipe bomb in the post, you shouldn't be a parent, you should be killed, you should be raped, you should have your ovaries cut out. And this was on every single video. Mm-hmm. So this wasn't just one person saying this, now and again. This was successive comments on every video. And it wasn't just me, I quickly formed a group of, feminist creators, men and women. and we would discuss certain people who were targeting our pages, you know, certain attitudes that we would see. And it was across the board, you know, every feminist creator or anyone discussing anything to do with equality, to do with male violence, to do with the gender pay gap, you know, it could be any topic, would receive such a shocking level of vitriol and anger and real rage against what we were saying. So I really saw, and actually, you know, that probably to me sums up the difference between sexism and misogyny, because the sexist comments of like calling me a tart, or like calling me babe, or like, you know, making those kind of derogatory but innocent kind of comments, all the way up to really deep-seated hatred towards me because I dared to talk about something that was around women's equality and women's rights.
Yeah, first of all, we're really sorry that you experienced this kind of behavior and abuse. And thank you for bringing this up, because we're going to discuss a bit on that later on for your TikTok experience. It's quite frustrating that you're well within the law. I mean, the work that you do and the way that you speak online, and you had to experience all this demeaning behavior, and you closed your account, whereas other people who are illegal to say still use their accounts and are free to do that. Yes, actually, yeah, I was going to ask, you know, every day when you scroll down a social media platform, you see many comments of that nature, and I always ask myself, why and where does this hate come from? Have you figured out, have you given an answer to this, or are you still wondering?
This is the basis of my PhD, so it's actually really interesting that I've come to that being the real focus for me, around trying to understand where this comes from. And I think for me, my light bulb moment was kind of tying together all of the different psychologies that I saw on display on that in that experience. But also, like you say, if you look on YouTube at particular videos, you know, I'm doing data analysis at the moment on YouTube comments, and kind of putting them into different categories, so like categorizing them into typologies of responses. So you will get people who don't like being told that they're doing something wrong, a very kind of basic psychological reactance against information that could be seen as being anti-male, although isn't. And that was always my biggest challenge, was to them, like, it's not about you as an individual man. This is about a bigger, you know, wider cultural and social issue. So I'm kind of, I'm really digging into that. And when I've looked at all those different typologies of reactants, and what I always come back to is they always come from a place of defensiveness. And that place of defensiveness to me is explained by the fact that everything, so that the sexism and the misogyny up to the explicit violence that is committed against women, is formed from male entitlement and male sexual entitlement in the main. So once we start having discussions where men feel as if we're taking something from them that they are innately entitled to, that elicits, you know, a response that could just be, well, I'm not like that. Why are you talking about men? Up to the entitlement of, I'm entitled to your body because I'm a man and you're a woman. So I think really all of it comes down to male entitlement, the way we bring boys up to believe that they are powerful, that they're capable of taking power. And then as they get older and we hand them that power, it corrupts. So either they grow up to be very loving, empathetic, positive men, or they grow up to think, actually, I can have what I want because I live in a society where this is handed to me on a plate. I know that women don't receive justice for what happens to them. This is normalized, and I have the freedom to do that. And I have the freedom to say that out loud, create billions and billions of followers on my content, and become a millionaire off the back of that. So, you know, I think, yeah, if you want to look at examples of men, you've got very good, decent, everyday men who still have that reactance of, why is she talking about men? Because that's not me. And I have many male friends who started off in that position and now completely understand it and correct other men when they feel like that, which I've seen in action through the work that I've done, which is amazing. Up to the iconic misogynists who create billion-pound profit off the back of women as commodity.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you see some positive outcome with friends of yours and other people you know. Going back to the Ipsos survey I mentioned before, 35% of the participants think that ignoring online abuse is the best approach for women. What is your view on that?
I hate that. So to me, that really, really feeds into the victim blaming narrative that we see so often. The responsibility again is put back on the woman. We know that ignoring it doesn't make any difference. We know that you already have that kind of harm that's been done to you anyway from one situation where that's happened. But, you know, when I talked about cyber flashing, so when I did my campaign with Bumble around cyber flashing, and as we've seen recently with the Emily Atack documentary here in the UK, lots of people, and sometimes from a really reasonable, positive, nice place, trying to be helpful, will say, well, why don't you just set your social media to private? Or why don't you just ignore it, just block them and move on with your day? Now, there's two problems with that. The problem, is that this becomes persistent, especially if you're trying to challenge attitudes. And if you're someone who, like me, really hates injustice and can't bear to think that people are just being allowed to get away with spreading this very misogynistic rhetoric online and nobody's doing anything about it, I see myself as having a responsibility to challenge that. So I'm not just going to ignore it, because I believe that people should be corrected, and I believe people most of the time can see the error of their ways. So why would we ignore it? But also it just really, like I said, it really again comes back to the fact that we have to normalize all these things that happen to women. And that normalization of these behaviors is what leads to a 1.4% conviction rate of rape. That's what leads to men feeling entitled to behave how they like with no boundaries, unless they are criminal boundaries. Whereas my work is all about, you know what, we don't need to keep bringing in new crimes, new legislation, although that helps, if we're not doing the work at the bottom, which is, can we talk about why we think this is okay? Because actually, when it does become your daughter receiving this kind of behaviour and experiencing this, you'll suddenly care about it and you'll suddenly become outraged. So we can have an open and honest conversation about what we believe is acceptable and not acceptable in 2023, I hope, away from the people who are set in creating these sort of gender stereotypes. Most moderate people will engage in that conversation and be quite shocked by the reality of it. So we have to have those conversations. We can't just shut them down and pretend it's not happening.
Yeah, you said about the laws that we don't need new laws, and I agree in the sense there are laws. It's just that they're not implemented, or people don't complain. They don't take action because either they're afraid or they feel that they won't get anything out of it. So yeah, ignoring it is, I would say, also is not an option. There was actually an interesting case with a German politician, and she's a Renate Kunast. She was a victim of demeaning comments, including calling her a piece of shit, an old filthy green pig, and that she should be raped. And she chose to ignore it. Unfortunately, the court in Berlin ruled that the posts, including those calling her for rape, did not constitute defamation and not insult, but also that she, as a politician, had to be able to endure some serious sexist insults. And as she said, this ruling sends a catastrophic signal because towards women in the internet as to what treatment they should put up with. Fortunately, this was overturned by the Federal Constitutional Court, saying that the court did not comply with the constitutional requirements of balancing freedom of expression against the personal rights of those affected, and ultimately decided that Facebook is required to use human content moderators to decide if the post constitutes a violation of the claimant's personality rights. So we hope that more cases like this come up in the future.
Yeah, I think it's so important that there is some accountability placed back on the social media platforms, because currently, they can just say, we're not responsible for what's on our platform, and just completely dodge any responsibility about what's happening. And online harm is shown to have very real consequences. Here in the UK, a teenage girl killed herself last year, and it was proven in court that the online content she consumed had a significant influence on her decision to take her life. And her dad does a lot of campaigning here in the UK, but our online safety bill that was due to pass got watered down, and they very much backpedaled on this emphasis on intent of harm. So I think that's the concern, is that the legislation that currently exists just isn't putting enough pressure on the social media content, on the social media platforms, to take responsibility for what their creators are doing. Now, I've had so much media off the back of my experience on TikTok, and they have never, ever reached out to me. They have never apologized. They've never said, we'll look at our reporting procedure. They've never said, we'll reinstate your account. There's never been any dialogue from them whatsoever. So to me, that shows a really clear sign that they don't care about the safety of the people on their platform.
Or about their reputation, because one would say, well, you made a clear, you transferred a message across your platforms, so everyone knows what they didn't do, but still they chose not to act. So there's a lot to talk about, but since we're a bit short on time, we want to move on the online platform's role in this unprecedented online misogynistic content. Social media, they seem to be a perfect place for disseminating hate speech. For one, they enable hate groups to develop, connect, and organize, and facilitating the spread of hate speech across platforms. On another note, anonymity in social media can encourage users to be more hateful in what they say. Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen said that Facebook is optimizing for content that gets engagement or reaction, and that its own research is showing that content that is hateful and divisive is easier to inspire people to anger than it is to other emotions. And so if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site, they'll click on less ads, and they'll make less money. So what is your understanding on how social media benefit from this kind of content?
I don't think enough people understand that if you aren't paying to use a service, then you are the commodity of that service. So every piece of content that you create, every time you engage with anything, you are the product, and the social media platforms are using you to make money. And having just that basic understanding, I think, does change the way that you look at your usage of social media. I've kind of become less and less a user of social media because of my experience on TikTok, because I can see it so clearly now. I can see so clearly how they monetize the most divisive content. They monetize content that creates extreme reactions in people because that drives revenue for them. That's it. And you also see that when contents become when creators become very popular and they become verified creators and they then can monetize the platform themselves, that offers a certain level of protection to that creator as well. So you can report that person more and somehow it doesn't affect them. They don't get the same level of scrutiny or regulation. So I think there's a lot of really important information out there. The Centre for Countering Digital Hate, so the CCDH, have released many reports in the last year around how TikTok actually benefits from very harmful and hateful content. And that's proven in the way that the algorithm works. The algorithm is designed with hate literally at its core of how to manipulate its users. And then you backpedal and think about who's using that platform, because it's not my age group who have probably, had more experience, can, legitimize what they're seeing a bit more, can bring in their everyday experiences to think, is this reality? So, you see teenagers, you see their constant engagement online. They are constantly engaged online and they are being pushed down rabbit holes of content that is being pushed their way by the algorithm. And they're not regaining any grasp on reality. And that's what worries me, is it's very easy. And I even felt myself very much, I was very stressed when I was on TikTok because all I was doing was engaging in arguments constantly with anti-feminist creators because they show each other their content.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big battleground. And then you kind of take a step back from it and you go outside and you talk to people and you're like, this isn't normal. Like, this isn't everyday life. Most people don't think like this, don't behave like this in the outside world. But if teenagers are shut in their rooms just with their phone for 8 hours a day, which some are, where are they getting that opportunity to go out and touch grass? Where are they getting the opportunity to go and speak to people who are moderate, who do live normal lives, who aren't hate filled and aren't kind of very obsessed with this idea of a gender war or this idea of they're being attacked, men are being attacked. So that to me is the really worrying thing, that it's the algorithm, it's the way that teenagers are fed this harmful content, and then the fact that even at home they're not getting the counter conversations, so they're really getting very obsessed and very embedded in a rhetoric that doesn't actually represent what's going on outside their front door.
Mm-hmm. If we take TikTok, for example, yes, it's so aggressive because you only need to pause a few moments before it recommends similar content to you. So I guess that's what they see. Like it's generating the same kind of content again and again. So how can we expect technology companies to act on their policies? Because they do have policies. TikTok, for example, changed its guidelines last year to ban misogynistic content, but we see that that's not happening. So how can we expect them to actually act on them when they're profiting from them?
I think the problem is that they use automatic reporting systems. So it's just bots answering the first level of reporting. Things get reviewed by humans at some point, but if that person doing the reviewing doesn't have a level of understanding around misogyny or around experiences of women or violence against women, then it's going to be very difficult to even overcome that hurdle. TikTok has tried, and the way that they ban certain words, that's a really good example of how you bring in some kind of policy and it does nothing. It's completely and utterly useless. So, for example, you can't say the word rape on TikTok. If you use that word either as a hashtag or you use it in your video, your video just won't go anywhere. It will get pushed down because of that word being used. It will get shadow banned. So everyone just uses the word grape, and that's just accepted. That's just, everyone uses a code language on TikTok. So, what is the point? What's the point of having these really, they're just really tick box exercises in, we'll do this, we'll placate people by saying, well, if you're 13, we'll only let you have a certain amount of time online, or we'll, and it's all very top level, very superficial, looking as if they're doing the right things. There is no understanding in that company about the impact, the effect, and the real life harm that comes from the content on there.
Mm-hmm. Talking about TikTok again, in your example, you mentioned earlier that you had an account called Not All Men, where you initiated a conversation about women's rights by challenging men getting defensive and saying the phrase "not all men." Can you sort of elaborate more on your example and what happened with TikTok?
Yeah, so I joined TikTok. I mean, like most people, I think, got frustrated with Instagram, just going from being a really, great, active, engaged platform to suddenly just bombing and like the bottom dropping out of it. And I thought for a long time, I hate it. I hate the idea of TikTok. I really don't think I'm going to enjoy being on that platform. But I was like, it could be a good opportunity to go and really look at this kind of attitude amongst men. So I joined in the summer and really quickly got quite a large following. So it was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, you get thousands of views on a video immediately. It's so much more engaged than Instagram. So I did a couple of videos about school uniform, and because it was the time when children were going back to school, and there were multiple schools in the UK that were lining girls up and measuring their skirts. So I did a video about school uniform, and it got like 1.4 million views. So it went viral, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I had so many, and that was very positive, very, very positive video, actually, probably the only one that was positive. Although that was where a woman told me that I shouldn't be allowed to be a parent, which I found baffling. But anyway, so that was a lot of young people started following me and commenting, because obviously that was something that was their experience. And then I talk about things like the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap was the thing that made people the most angry, which I found really interesting, because actually it wouldn't be talking about male violence that would make men very angry. It would be the gender pay gap. Exceptionally angry. I was called a sexist slag for suggesting that there was a gender pay gap. And then the usual prove that there's a patriarchy conversations, So the patriarchy made people angry, the pay gap especially. And then if I did talk about male violence, it would be that very typical, it's not all men, you're creating an issue with men and boys, and you are responsible for the rates of male suicide. So that's one of their other arguments against feminist creators, is that feminism seeks to divide, and because it seeks to divide and it destroys families and it takes children away from their fathers, that it is responsible for male suicide. Now, the logical people who can think about arguments and frame arguments and have discussions would say, well, if that was the case, why is it that actually male suicide is much lower than it was in the 1950s, when we had a very, stereotypical patriarchal structure in the home? They don't want to, they can't engage in any of that sort of conversation. It's just, I know a man who killed himself because of what a woman did. And that would all very much then tie into false allegations of rape. That was a big one. And if you tried to argue anything with statistics, it would be, well, you can't trust the statistics because men don't report, women exaggerate, the police only believe women, the court system is biased towards women, which we know is the complete opposite of what's actually true. And they have very stock answers and very stock arguments that they, feed across a lot of podcasts that they listen to. So there's a lot of creators who have a podcast set up, where they have debates going on. I mean, they only bring on people who agree with them, really. But there's one particular female creator who I literally can't bring myself to listen to because it just enrages me so much. It's just not good for my own mental health to listen to her rhetoric. Say, anti-abortion rhetoric, anti-feminism, women are liars, women cry rape, men should be providers, men should be strong. And then not recognizing that actually those very things that we are telling men to be are the things that are causing the rates of male suicide. So I got very quickly very consumed by, wow, this is crazy. Like, I can't believe that there are these discussions going on, and these people have millions of viewers, millions of followers. And then, so that's one thing, right? Men's rights activists is one area. Then you've got these life coaches, dating coaches. And to me, I started doing quite a lot of learning around domestic abuse and domestic violence at that time, and became really, really concerned about the rhetoric that those people were pushing, because it was very much, this comes off the back of the pickup artists, which was, a few years ago, to now, where it's very much, it's a light version of the guy who's locked up in Romania. So if you think of it like that, it's like a lighter version. It's much more palatable. So these are just young men who say, I'm going to teach you how to get a girlfriend. And to get a girlfriend, you need to just follow these steps, and I will teach you. So it's exactly the same process. Okay, so it's like, I will teach you with these steps how to be successful, how to be a successful man. And that includes, going to the gym, you have a good mindset. So again, right, lots of positive things. There's nothing wrong with suggesting that someone has a positive mindset, goes to the gym, works out, has solid friendships, lots of good things that are being pushed. And then they talk about how these relationships should function. And they are that you need a girlfriend who has had a very, very low body count. So they have some kind of pseudoscience that they've created, that if a woman has slept with more than 5 people, they can't bond to a man anymore. And they really believe that there's some statistic that they spout that's something like 80% less chance of having a successful marriage. So they teach young boys and men to look for girls who are virgins, preferably, girls who are passive, girls who don't want to go out with their friends, because we all know what happens in clubs. So if they were loyal to you, they wouldn't be going out with their friends. They're not allowed male friends. They should want to stay at home and be, subservient, basically. So again, you could look at that comment that they make in isolation and think, it's a bit sexist, but really, is it that harmful? But then if you actually know anything around coercive control and how coercive control is the first step towards, much more serious domestic violence, it's so concerning. And they were the creators that I actually then highlighted to the newspapers here in the UK, because I was like, do you know what? Even if your son isn't interested in what colour is your Bugatti, they might be listening to this guy, because this guy is based in the UK. He looks like you. He's a young man who's got a regular job. He's successful. All right, he's probably got, he's got a reasonable job. He's buff. He goes to the gym. He's really successful with women. And those creators play very much within the community guidelines. So if you report any of those, that they won't be touched at all by the reporting system. Because as far as TikTok's concerned, they're not doing anything wrong. Actually saying your girlfriend shouldn't have male friends isn't against the law. It's against the law if you start controlling their ability to work, what they do and where they go. So it's very muddy. It's very, grey area in terms of, are they being misogynistic? Yes. but are they crossing a line into some kind of criminality or some kind of boundary in the community guidelines? So I was challenging lots of these creators and quite quickly got myself a real hate following. And they then take their, so what they do if they're really trying to get a big following where they don't get reported, they will then open up a Facebook group or a Discord server. So they would then take their following underground, or they might have like a Patreon, so they might have like a paid system as well. And they'll take their following underground. There they can't be reported, they're safe, and they can continue that kind of training, that kind of manipulation, or those kinds of discussions. And they, within there, share videos of creators that they want to take down. So I could put a video up, and it would get 100 of my videos got reported within like an hour, because they go, right, this person, you need to go over and you need to report her, and they all report you all at once. And this is the kind of thing that I was like, are these people children? Like, for a start, like, how do they not have jobs? Like, how do they devote so much time to doing this, and have the psychology around doing that? To me is not normal. Like, it's not normal to behave like that as adults. And a lot of the female MRAs were the worst in that respect, because they would sit and cry on video saying how I've bullied them, I've harassed them, and how they're so upset by what I've done. So then they would all come over to my page and either completely attack me in the comment section, or just report the video, and then report every comment as well. And eventually TikTok, you'll hit that threshold and they'll just shut you down. So that's how I ended up getting banned, because of the 3 strikes and you're out kind of system. So yeah, I ended up getting banned. I did have a backup account that I used for a little while, and then I got doxxed. So as soon as I got doxxed, I was like, oh, I'm out of here, because I used my real name, obviously, on Instagram and in my work, but on TikTok, it was so angry and poisonous that I wasn't using my name. I wasn't talking about my daughter. I wasn't talking about where I live. And then a female MRA doxed me. So I was like, I just need to get out of this. Like, I just need to get away from these people, because even if they're not going to come and do something, for my mental health, for my mental safety, almost, I felt like I just had to remove myself from the situation completely.
Mm-hmm. We're very sorry that you had to delete your account, and that you were pushed out in this way. Actually, we're talking about men acting in this misogynistic way, whereas, as you mentioned, women do it as well, because they're also victims of patriarchy and all these stereotypes and upbringing of boys and men. So you also mentioned about this experience. You mentioned on Mary Claire UK that there's a trick called rage farming.
Yeah.
Tactics or sort of. Could you explain what this is and how this was used?
Yeah, so rage farming is what I was just talking about, where they get all of their followers to report you. So that works really well on TikTok, because of their reporting system, will just shut you down. So it'll just shut down a video. And then once you've been on a warning, you get like a suspension, usually like a 7-day suspension or something. And then when you come back onto it, your videos just won't gain any traction, because you're kind of shadow banned. So yeah, they get together in their groups, and they'll either stitch you, but most of the time they won't stitch you, because if somebody stitches you, you get alerted to that. Most of the time they'll just screen record your video and play it and have like report, and just get all of their followers to report you. And most of these people obviously have a really big following, so they have the ability to get really big numbers of reports going in at one time, which will just shut you down completely. Wow,
it's really interesting how it works. And also it was really interesting what you mentioned, because we may say that online misogyny is persistent, and hateful speech and hate speech but actually it's also other things that may seem innocent at first, but they had hide so many sexist and misogynistic characteristics, sort of to say. So how do you think this online content behavior and misogyny translates offline?
I think it takes a little while to see the real life experiences. But what I do know, so we've had in the UK, we've had a mass shooting already in Plymouth in 2021, where the guy that did that was he was only 20, I think he was like 22, 23. He was very engaged with incel ideology and incel content. He killed his mother first. Now we're seeing a rise in the UK of women being killed by their sons. So that's a worrying uptick in that. So yeah, he was a really clear example of somebody who was engaged in that ideology, went out and killed 5 people because he had a pump action shotgun in his house. We've seen Molly Russell, who was the teenage girl who committed suicide because of the online harm that she'd experienced. 18 to 24-year-olds, actually 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK are the group who are most likely to experience domestic abuse. So we have to very carefully, I think, watch the statistics around the link between what boys are learning from the internet and how that plays out in relationships. I think that's around. We already know about the link between pornography and sexual violence, and then it's the more pervasive stuff as well. And I don't know, it's difficult to measure. So that kind of the attitudes about trying to bring back more of a traditional family, the trad wife movement, the idea around the nuclear family is the only positive structure that you can have. That I think is going to take generations to show through. So it's quite difficult to measure a lot of it, and that's part of the problem. Is it's so hard to measure. So my work is really around focusing on that defensiveness in men and how we can overcome that, because I think we have to do that, because if we don't do that, we can't have men engaging in the conversation, and we can't have really honest conversations and open conversations about why men are holding these views and then enacting on them at a later date. So are we seeing better representation of women? No, not especially. I think recently in terms of gender equality in the workplace, we've gone backwards on that. There's lots of other factors at play. The cost of childcare in the UK is one of the highest in Europe. So that's a massive issue for women here. Employers not really doing enough to challenge those problems. So I think there's going to be a lot of aspects that play out. We obviously have a rise in all forms of violence against women and girls. The last 2 years, we've had a significant increase. We had our highest ever reports of rape in the UK last year at 70,000, just over 70,000 reports of rape, bearing in mind that only 1 in 6 are actually reported. So you want to times that by 5 to get anywhere near the exact number of how many rapes are happening in the UK at any one time. Domestic violence is increasing. So can you tie it, to online abuse? I don't know. I don't know if you can actually really show, this resulted in this. I think we need to look at it as like a two-way street. We need to look at it as, are we seeing more incidents because of attitudes or because of the uptick in violence? Is that creating more people to be emboldened and say things out loud that they wouldn't have said? People have to remember as well that what people say online quite often they wouldn't dream of saying out loud. So, there's that element, as well as education around what you say to somebody online is just as harmful and just as upsetting as if you said it to their face. So maybe we start by telling children, do you know what, if you wouldn't say it out loud, don't say it in words, don't write it down. But yeah, I think it's something that is definitely affecting women's experiences in multitudes of ways.
Yeah, I think that's where the importance of research comes in, because then data can sort of identify what are the problems and the correlations between online and offline violence. So moving on to the regulatory changes we see happening around. On an EU level, we have the 2016 Code of Conduct on countering illegal hate speech online, as well as the recent regulatory framework on content moderation, the Digital Services Act, which is aimed at requiring tech companies to actively police their platforms for illegal content, such as hate speech, ensuring that what is illegal offline is illegal online. In the UK, I read that the Online Safety Bill is awaiting passage in Parliament, aiming to place duties of care for illegal content on service users, the user service providers such as Facebook and Google. Based on these changes we see, what do you expect in terms of online platforms' effectiveness towards online abuse?
I'm not very positive about any real life changes, because I'm not especially confident that the UK government is going to pass a bill that actually has enough strength in it to put some accountability back onto the platforms. We don't have an especially fair government in place at the moment. I think we have a government who's very much focused on revenue, capitalism, and they're going to lose a lot of money, I think, if they start to regulate more. The people who own Google, lobby our government. It's that you can't really, I don't see a way that we can really rely on the government to make the changes that we need, because I don't think they will put the pressure on the social media platforms. There's some amazing work being done, and there's a lot of pressure on them to strengthen things like, for example, cyber flashing became a crime, so we won that battle, but it's still an intent-based crime. So even though it's become a crime, you have to prove that that person did it with the intent to cause upset and distress. So, how you actually prove that, when we know that most of the time people aren't sending sexually explicit images for that reason. A lot of that cyber flashing that goes on amongst young people is they send a photo to get a photo in return, or they have photos as like commodity that they use between friends, or they use it to embarrass somebody, or it's quite difficult to get a conviction, although we have just seen a conviction on image-based abuse over here with a Love Island star who's just been jailed for 21 months for putting a video on his OnlyFans account of his ex-girlfriend. So there are cases that are getting to that stage. But in terms of social media, I mean, I've seen content myself that's criminal. I've seen violent content I've reported which has come back no violation. I've seen out and out racist comments that I've reported that has come back no violation. We have a huge, huge, huge way to go, I think, before they put the provision in place that really would make any difference in terms of people's experiences, which is why I think legislation and criminality is one phase, is one part of it, which is important, but it also just really needs a whole lot of investment in education and in real decent conversations going on around how we treat other people and how this impacts people's lives.
Mm-hmm. I think it's quite important to say that there was a case, I think in Germany, whereby a user alongside an NGO called Heyday, managed to sort of get a decision whereby Twitter, I think, had to pay compensation for an online abuse they received, which can be a positive sort of on that.
Yeah. And I don't know how much the UK can now wriggle out of EU, regulation as well. So, that's the other thing that's a concern here in England.
Hopefully, I don't know, hopefully we'll see some change happening. Also in UK, it's discussed whether misogyny should be included in the hate crime law that already exists. They actually asked the British Law Commission to comment on that. They said that they don't feel that it should be included in the hate crime law. What is your view on that?
So Boris Johnson said that he wouldn't make it a hate crime because they would be inundated with reports and they couldn't cope with the scale of reporting, which I think says it all, really. I do think it should be considered a hate crime. I think that's one really clear way to send a very strong message, and that would have significant impact, I think, on how people behave in terms of public sexual harassment and online harassment. I think if you did that, you'd have to be very, very clear about what the definition is of misogyny and what constitutes that as a crime. We do have some police forces in the UK who did take that law on as individual police forces. So it started in Nottingham, where a police force did deem it to be a hate crime, but I don't think anybody really knows how to even report that. So that's the problem, I think. Without a really clear definition and without a really clear processing, a really clear reporting process that women understand how to report that, can't really see how it would work in the UK. I can't see it happening anytime soon, unfortunately.
Actually, Joan Smith, a UK columnist and activist, she's arguing that misogyny is not included. The amendment does not specifically include misogyny, but rather gender and sex as a characteristic for the hate crime law. And she's also challenging us to think that this kind of proposal includes misandry as well, in the sense that this would create a huge opportunity for men to argue that they're being affected by, standing up for your own rights as a feminist and for other women's rights. What do you think about that? What is your view on that point?
I think we're kind of in a position at the moment where we have to be careful, I think, how we tread the line in terms of engaging with men. I've got, some research that I'm doing at the moment is actually showing that some of the campaigning that's going on is actually radicalizing more people than it's actually helping. So I wouldn't want to give any more influence or any more power to any of those content creators who already push the idea that men need to be, we need a UN man, we need a violence against men strategy. We trying to assert some kind of parity around gender and gender inequality, which quite frankly is ludicrous, but they believe it and they fight for it. That's not to say that there are particular things that do affect men, which is absolutely true. And there could be a case, that the legal process in family court needs to be improved. I'm sure it does. There is absolutely a problem with male suicide and mental health provision. Whether that's down to systemic oppression of men, no, I don't believe so. So I think I think that's the problem, that if we are criminalising misogyny and misandry, that's going to very much legitimise those arguments that we are feminists especially are trying to demonize, villainize, and repress men to gain power.
Mm-hmm. I think the focus should also be on how these crimes are recorded and what can be done about that. So you have working with the police yourself. You have experience, and we read that the Nottinghamshire Police in 2016 was doing an experimental was working on an experimental basis to effectively make misogyny a hate crime. What is your experience on the capacity of the police to identify that a hate crime was motivated by misogyny?
It's not something, I think at one point Essex Police did engage with it, but it wasn't really rolled out as having a reporting process. The police force that I work with, so we're just south of London, so it's quite a small police force, but quite progressive in the respect that they approached me to do some work with them around challenging sexism and misogyny within their internal culture. And they do recognise that if they don't get that bit right, the experience of women when they encounter police officers is not going to be right. So they do have that understanding, which I think is great. We've obviously had such significant cases in the UK recently because of Wayne Couzens and David Carrick, who's the Met police officer that's just been convicted for rape, 24 cases of rape, I think, 24 counts of rape over 20 years as a serving police officer. So there's a lot of focus on police culture, on women's faith and trust in the police, and all of these things are tied in together. And they all, when I've been training the officers at Essex Police, I centre it all on the rape culture pyramid and talk about how, if you're allowing sexist jokes to go backwards and forwards on WhatsApp within the police station, amongst each others, or you're on a night out and you're behaving in an inappropriate way towards women, you are playing a huge role in women not trusting you, and really reducing that faith, which is already at an all-time low in this country. And then we know that if women don't trust the police, they don't report. If they don't report, they don't get funding. The police don't get the funding they need, or the councils don't get the funding they need. And it's just this vicious circle that goes round and round. Low reporting, low criminal convictions, high cases of crime, especially with the economic situation the way it is. It's a really difficult situation. It's difficult for the police because how they centre themselves in conversations around sexism and misogyny, they're met with such a backlash. They're met with a backlash from women, and they're met with a backlash from men as well. So how they communicate is so important. They're working hard, all of them, trying to improve representation of female police officers within the force. But again, you've got 70% white men as the police force really in the UK. So it's a tough crowd. When I do my training, it's a tough crowd. It's not people who are necessarily engaged on this issue. They don't have a good understanding of how their own internal bias and their own understanding of violence against women and girls. I don't feel the police in this country have a grip on how that influences and affects their professionalism and their treatment of women out on the street.
Mm-hmm.
I do talk to them about that and say, everything that you consume online, the media that you consume, the way you've been brought up, where you've come from, your culture, your religious beliefs, all of this has an impact on how you view women. And if you don't understand that yourself, then we're really, we've got a problem here, because you need to understand that your attitude towards women is directly going to influence those women that you encounter. And if you're encountering women who have something awful has happened to them at the hands of another man, you are in a privileged position where you should be trusted, and you should be acting in a way where women feel that they will be listened to. So talking about victim blaming, and how victim blaming in the court system, even, it's really, it's a lot. It's a big subject. I don't get enough time with them really to really focus in on how their own internal culture is so crucial in terms of faith in the police, and also just their effectiveness as police officers as well.
Mm-hmm. It should be mandatory to have sort of professional training on these kind of issues, because it boils down to what your own experience and bias has to do with how you take a report and act on it. As we reach the end of today's episode, we were wondering if you have any thoughts on how we could reach men through this episode, those who deny patriarchy even exists and are prone to sort of attack women online, perhaps sort of prescribing a different ideology.
Well, that's a great question. So what I would say is, what I found from my research is finger pointing and blame and shame achieves nothing, really. What I focus on is our similarities, and our shared values, because most of us function as adults with the opposite sex in our lives, and we run households and we run families with male partners and male peers and colleagues, and I think we have to normalize these conversations, and we have to just try and have as many conversations as we can around, do we live in a just society actually, and are there things that we can improve for all of us? Because when I talk about safety, I try and make it really obvious that if you improve safety for women, you improve safety for everybody. And actually, if we take it from a community angle and we say, we've all got a responsibility to keep each other safe, rather than saying men are the problem and we need to push men out of the conversation, we say, how can we all, so you're a good man who's interested in this subject and you want to do more, how can I bring you in? And I think you do that through saying you can be part of the solution. So, for example, my partner now is coming in and helping me deliver some workshops as part of a counter-terror project that I'm doing, because those teenage boys probably don't want to listen to me. I'm old enough to be their mum for a start. They don't want to listen to me talking about that. But if I can get like a really positive male role model, and my partner is a big, tattooed, very kind of traditional masculine looking guy, him going in there and talking to them is so much more effective. And I'm not saying at all ever that men should have the voice in all of this, because I don't believe they should. I think men's first input, it should be to listen. Mm-hmm. Just listen. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. When I was a teacher, we used to say that all the time. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them at that ratio. And men quite often get so involved that they take over things, and it's like, don't offer a platform. Give us the opportunity to talk about these things, but learn how to sit and listen, and do that without defensiveness. And try and do it without thinking that it's an attack on you, because it's not an attack on the good men. It's not an attack on the everyday man. It's an attack on, ideas and ideologies that we've all been brought up with, and there are many, many women who also need that education as well, who engage in victim blaming, who engage in upholding the structures that oppress us. So, we need to, I think, work on a really human level first. And, we all want to improve things for everybody. And also, for me, I talk a lot about alternative forms of justice, because lots of people don't trust the police, or they don't trust the government to make things better. So it's like, what? We have so much power as citizens, actually, that what can we do as citizens working together to make things better for people? And if that means that by the end of this year, you know, we have 100 businesses in the city centre that are saying, actually, sexist behaviour isn't welcome here, and that's the stance that they're taking, then we're pushing that behaviour out of our city centre, and we're making it a much better, thriving, you know, community and experience for everybody, not just for women, but it's going to help everybody. I would steer away from the whole imagine it's your daughter kind of thing, because to me, you know, you shouldn't have to do that. Men shouldn't have to think about their daughter to have some understanding around how the world isn't set up on an equal footing for everybody. And sometimes engaging in conversations about race as well is another way to kind of bring the conversation in on a bit more of a, you know, using an analogy of, if I'm, as a white person, I wouldn't sit here and host a podcast with all white people about white supremacy. Like, you just wouldn't do it because you don't have that lived experience. So as a man, what can you do? And actually the first thing is listening to women's experiences, because you're not one and you won't ever understand what that is.
Yeah, I think listen to what people with the, you know, women and other people of who have an experience of sexism and misogynistic behavior is an important step before actually talking and acting or getting defensive about it. Also, what you said, I mean, yeah, I agree. We shouldn't, the paradigm shouldn't be imagine if it was your daughter. It should be like, what can I do to sort of, what can I do as a father or as a man or as a partner to sort of discuss and take a role on these things, because fathers are role models. So
yeah, I do. If I talk about parenting at all, what I say to men generally is, you know, you raise girls with this, you know, if we're going to look at man hating or like feminists being man haters, dads engage in this all the time, raising daughters as, you know, you're not dating anybody, you're not going out like that, you know, I'm going to carry a gun and no one's going to come near my daughter. You're engaging in that conversation from the minute your daughter's born, and you're teaching her men are bad, men are bad, men are bad. And then at the same time, you're telling her that her one goal in life should be to go and marry a man. Like, where is the logic in that? You know, so to me, it's like, let's unpick or unpack this weird rhetoric that we teach our girls, which is that you should be scared of men. But actually, when you get to a point, you know, sadly, that something happens to you, you're then told that you're imagining it, or you're making it up, or it's silly, or you shouldn't worry, or, you know. So girls are fed such a distorted message about boys and men that I think just doesn't need to happen. It needs to be much more around, you know, there is a possibility that this is going to happen to you because you are a girl. Isn't that terrible? And then dad saying, actually, that is terrible, but I'm saying that to my daughter and not to my son. What can I do to unpack that, you know, systemic, cultural kind of illogic sort of attitude we have?
Do you wish to say anything we didn't cover?
No, I think we covered a lot. We got through a lot.
Reaching the end of our today's episode, where we covered online misogyny, its detrimental effects, and possible ways to deal with it, speak out, and social media accountability. We believe that only if individuals enjoy the same protection in digital spaces as in the analog world can open societies continue to exist. And as journalism, activism, including feminism, is increasingly digital, it is really vital that women's rights online, including equality of participation, are protected and upheld. So that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you, Karen, for joining us during this enlightening discussion. And we hope that today's episode was interesting to you, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. So please leave a comment down below. And as always, thanks for listening to Pink Talks.
Thank you for listening to Pink Talks. Before we go, show some love for our favorite podcast by leaving us a comment and subscribe to the channel. We are Young Educators, a non-profit organization working on human rights, gender equality, and active citizenship. and this podcast was created with the support of our team: Ana Catarina Caldeira,
Laura Stafia,
Alexandra Marquido.